So, Butch, your book, Breaking Barriers, Barbados to England and Back. I like that title. Obviously, the Breaking Barriers part, primarily because you were the first black player to play for England. Is that the reason for the title?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons, Simon. I think when you really look at the title of the book where it says Breaking Barriers, you can really put it down to many things because one, obviously, becoming the first black player for England is breaking a barrier. I think perhaps breaking a long held barrier to that point. No person of a black player had played for England before, so that's another one. It's also breaking barriers for the area that I come from in England, in Barbados. We don't have any test players from that area. So it's breaking barriers in many ways.
You talk a lot about your upbringing in the book. I found it interesting that most cricketers, it's changing a bit now, but certainly from our generation, most cricketers were reared in the game by a man, either their father, their uncle, their grandfather, their brother, a mate, whatever. Now, interestingly, your upbringing was very much female orientated, wasn't it? You were brought up by your grandmother and I think an aunt, and your parents were in England, so your father wasn't there. So actually you had quite a sort of female influence. So did that kind of collaborate to get you involved in cricket?
Well, the interesting thing about that was, Simon, as you said, yes, I was brought up and my household was primarily females. I mean, I was actually the oldest boy in the house, only by a couple of years. So there were two younger than myself. So I couldn't really look up to them for inspiration. But I mean, cricket really, my cousin, Monica, who was the daughter of my aunt who looked after us, she loved the game of cricket. And in actual fact, a lot of the women in those days were really into the game of cricket. So, I mean, Monica was the first one who actually took me to see my first test match. She took me to see that test match. So it very much was a female influence. There were no males in the house, but obviously out on the street where you played, you were playing amongst males because the females were not playing. But within the household, it was all female.
And what was the sort of cricket that you played? Describe it.
Well, basically, most of my cricket was informal. It was just a group of the local boys from school or the area just getting together, playing in the road, all forms of cricket, all types of cricket, different balls, different rules, very much informal. I probably played one or two primary school matches for my school. Obviously, I was a younger boy than most of the others in the team when I played. I played when I was around 10 years of age. I think I played in the primary school team. But those games were very infrequent because where we were in St. Philip, the nearest school that we played against probably was in St. John, which is about 20 minutes away, and transportation was always an issue. I can't remember whether we actually had to walk there or not, but you probably played two games against them a year, and that was it. It was very much learn as you go along on the streets.
I remember talking to Garfield Sobers, who of course comes from your island, a different parish, about his early cricket. And he said that a lot of it was in the road, like you, and it was using a tennis ball. And one of the reasons he said he had such a high backlift and follow through was because you had to hit a tennis ball really hard to make it go anywhere. And so he developed this sort of very high backlift and follow through. What about you? What kind of balls did you use? And is that the source of, for me, your outstanding shot or play was pulling and hooking? You picked a ball which wasn't all that short and pulled it severely a long way, and obviously hooking as well. Did that come from bouncy balls in the street? Where did that kind of skill come from?
Yeah, Simon, listen, we played with, a variety of balls. As you said, a tennis ball when you could get it, or, sometimes the tennis ball was taped. I mean, we used the inner bladder of bicycle tubing where you cut into small round rings and then you put it all over the ball. Balls were made with cork, made with cloth, or just anything that you could get to make a ball. So you played with many different types of balls. You didn't always play on the road. You played on any little patch of grass that you could find. Then you have to prepare it yourself. We used to prepare our own pitches to play on. We played also a lot of game that we call marble cricket, which is played on one knee. Most players you'll find would play that game. That would be your first introduction to the game. And the ball underarm, and obviously you couldn't bowl fast, so it would spin. You had to spin the ball. That taught you how to play with the bat and pad close together. The tennis ball, what that taught you was because Garfield Sobers may have been lucky. He would have probably played in an area where there was space, but where we played, the houses would be close. We were playing between houses, which means, you know, part and parcel of the of our game was if you hit the house, you're out. So you had to be able to try and keep the ball down. And then we played first bounce. So if they catch the ball first bounce, you were out. So you had to learn how to maneuver. Otherwise, you wouldn't bat for very long. And sometimes because there were so many boys, if you get out, you probably wouldn't bat again. So those are sort of things that we learned as a kid. I mean, obviously it's different now because you can't play in the road. It's far too busy. In those days, you would probably play for an hour, and if one car come by, that's it. Different story now.
Oh, lovely idea. When did you first realise that you had exceptional talent, that you could hit balls for 4 and 6 that others couldn't?
I don't think I did, Simon. What really happened was, as a boy growing up, I was by no means the best player amongst my group. There were much better players than me, for sure. I guess perhaps what was different between me and them was that I had more passion for the game, to play, to learn. I would spend more time watching the older boys from the sideline because the older boys wouldn't let you play with them. And so I probably had more passion, more drive than the others. But in terms of ability, there were a lot of players in the group who had much more ability than myself. I guess maybe later on in life, as things developed in England and my game developed, then those things came through. But as a kid, I was by no means the best player, for sure.
And you came to England when you were about 13, is that right, I think?
Yeah, 13 and a half.
Yeah, and you came to reunite with your parents. Ricky Elcock, who did a similar thing when he was sort of 11 or 12 from Barbados, he said he remembers when he first arrived in England, the two things that struck him, obviously apart from the cold, were TV, being much more universal, but actually particularly, he said toasters. He'd never seen a toaster. He said, why would you get a nice piece of bread and put it in a machine and burn it? Is how he described it. What did you recall from, what were the surprising things that you found when you arrived?
Well, I mean, obviously, as I said, the obvious ones, as you said, I mean, the weather, etc., was different. For me, the fact that you had to spend so much time in the house was a real problem because I'm used to being outdoors, 24/7. To have your own TV was something because back in the day in the country, I remember there was one family in the entire area that had a TV, so everybody would be in their houses every night. So I guess to have a television and in the house. But I think the most striking thing for me was that I didn't see anyone playing cricket in the street. That was telling. Everybody was playing football, a game that I hadn't really experienced before. So those were the things that really got me thinking, what are you doing here?
But then you progressed quite quickly, didn't you? And you got trials and things like that, and then you got taken on by MCC Young Pros, used to be called the ground staff loosely, didn't it? And you were there in the first intake with Ian Botham. So what was that like? What do you remember of him at that age?
Well, I think what Beefy always had was he was big and strong and loved to hit the ball over the fence. There was nothing cultural about the way he played. And at the start, obviously, his bowling was just effort. He wasn't the bowler he became later on. I think for someone like Beefy, he was very lucky working with Bill Jones. And again, Bill Jones was actually from Stevenage, where I was from. And when we both went to Lord's, Bill Jones was the head boy at Lord's. And Bill Jones, I'm not sure whether you're aware of Bill, but he was a pretty big guy in terms of size, but he had the ability to swing the ball prodigiously both ways and a steady bowler. And he really taught Both how to bowl, and they spent a lot of time together. Later on, obviously, Both developed his bowling to really a different level, but he was not like that on the MCC Young Pro staff, I can tell you.
And what kind of jobs did you have on non-match days?
The only we didn't have anything to do really with the ground, in terms. There was that really big roller. Was it Lord Thomas? You may remember that had a massive roller that occasionally, we would help pull that. But primarily, our jobs was playing cricket. We were in the nets all the time, training or then playing second level matches up and down the country. Primarily, it was just that. And also, the other thing we had to do was to bowl at MCC members in the evening when they left the office and came for a hit. Something Both didn't take kindly to. His thing was to try and hit them on the head as often as he could. As he could. But yeah, I mean, that was it. And then obviously, the other good thing was test match days. We had to sell scorecards from those little boxes. But we got the opportunity to obviously see all of these great players and feel the atmosphere and be part of something that we'd all dreamed about many years ago. And then obviously some of us realised it later on.
Were you still more hero worshipping West Indies players at that time? You know, when you joined Middlesex in the sort of early 70s, and obviously you'd been based at Lords. I mean, I remember going to a test match, 73, West Indies, England, you know, and it was an amazing atmosphere, and Sobers got 100, and Kanhai got 100, Bernard Julian got 100, and the atmosphere was full of, you know, West Indian fans, and it was amazing. Were you still quite heavily influenced by West Indian players in those days?
Yeah, most definitely, because I hadn't been into the English system at that level. So, you know, I still revered those players of the past. I was seeing those ones coming through now. And you may remember sort of mid-70s, you know, in the winter I would go back to Barbados, you know, play club cricket, play for Barbados, etc. I was still very much West Indian at that point in time.
Do you think that helped in your selection for England, that you had something else, something different? You had a flamboyance about your batting, which not many English players had, actually, apart from maybe David Gower.
Yeah, I think that probably was a factor. Also, I guess they were going to play against the West Indies, so, you know, to have somebody on your team, you know, who understands and perhaps plays similarly is a help. And, you know, I think also the fact that perhaps over the years, obviously, you know, I'd seen Both's rise from where we were. You know, we'd always been being good friends all the way through. And, you know, he was captain at the time, and perhaps he felt that, you know, I was somebody that could assist the team on what was going to be a very difficult tour.
And you played a couple of one-dayers before that, didn't you, in England? But you only found out about your selection for the Test tour, I think, on TV. Is that right?
Well, no, I found out for my ODI selection from my wife. First of all, she called to say, you might have been around then, actually, because we just finished training and we were heading to the tavern for lunch, and she called and asked me, have you been selected for England? And I said, no, I'm here at Lord's right now. I'm just going to the tavern to get some lunch. I said, no. She said, well, her boss just told her he heard it on the news. So I said, well, I haven't heard anything. Got home at 6 o'clock. My father rang, same question and same answer. At that stage, not a word. It was only we were watching the 9 o'clock news on the TV, and there it was. So that was the first I knew. And
we're talking here, you know, it's 40 years ago, 1980, very different times to now, obviously. What was the reaction? What was the public reaction? Did you get much flack, you know, kind of accusation of why do we need a black player in our team? Or, you know, what was the was there any, you know, prejudicial remarks or, you know, letters or anything? Do you get any kind of animosity?
So, I mean, you had everything. You had those people, both English and West Indian, who were delighted that you were selected. And then you had those, both West Indian and English, that thought it was a shame that you were being selected. So I got letters, I got calls, all about those things. I remember one West Indian guy actually wrote to me, and he said, "Dear Butcher, you have now taken black people back to the days of slavery." He said, Judas was promised 30 pieces of silver. How many are you getting? So I remember that to this day. But on the opposite end, there were reactions of congratulations, this is a great thing, as I said, both from English people and from West Indian people. But it was mixed.
How did you feel? Did it dawn on you that, you know, I mean, that there'd been 100 years of Test cricket, more, and you were the first black player to play for England? Did it dawn on you the enormity of that?
Not at all. That was the furthest thing from my mind. I think what was really on my mind was the fact that I was fulfilling an ambition I had when I was a little kid in Barbados. As a kid in Barbados, I wanted to play international cricket. I didn't know that it would work out whereby it would be in England. Obviously, at that time as a kid, you're thinking all you know is the West Indies, so that's what you want to do. But here I was being selected to fulfill that ambition. So it never ever crossed my mind about being the first black player and 100 years before nobody's played before. That never entered my mind at all.
And actually, you acquitted yourself well, didn't you? That first ODI, one of the first two ODIs, you got a 50, and it was the fastest 50 by
a debutant
for like 40 years or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the fastest 50 by a debutant, and that record really stood until 2021. That happened in 1980, so it was some 41 years before anybody broke that record.
I mean, did you feel that must have been very satisfying? Did you feel pressure to deliver because you were, the first black player? I mean, was that an extra pressure, do you think?
In those first couple of games, no, because as I said, you're selected to play for England. The adrenaline is flowing. At Middlesex, we had a lot of players who got selected for England. So, that was something that was driving you on. You're playing against the Aussies, who are England's arch enemies. You're in a team with some fantastic players. They don't come any better than George Boycott, Goa, Gat, you got Botham, etc. That's be playing with those guys. So your adrenaline is really pumping. So, those first couple of games, I played in the second ODI against Australia because Alan Butcher played in the first one. It was only a 2-match series, so I played in the second one, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
You were a trailblazer, though, weren't you? Even though you didn't kind of necessarily know it. I mean, if you look at the list of black players that came to play for England after that, obviously, Gladstone Small, Devon Malcolm, Daffy and Chris Lewis, Sid Lawrence, and others. It was quite a...
Don't forget Norman Wilf.
Norman Cowns, from your own team, exactly, Middlesex.
When I got selected, Norman actually wrote to me at that time. He felt inspired by it at that time. His turn came later.
So, actually, even though you weren't aware of it maybe at the time, I mean, it actually must fill you with pride of what you started, really.
It does. It does now, particularly later on when those same players, same Devon, the same Norman, Gladstone and others said that when they saw that I was selected and played, that they suddenly thought to themselves, if I work hard, I can do this. He's no different to me, so I have got a chance. It inspired and motivated them, and I feel proud about that later on. As I said, obviously back then that was not in my mind. But I think now I feel really happy that, one, I was able to open that door to allow others to dream that they can get through the door as well. So that was very satisfying.
And of course, you were part of a group of often 5 black players in the Middlesex team. You mentioned Norman Cowns, there was Wilf Slack, there was Wayne Daniel, who of course was West Indian, playing for the West Indies, Ricky Elcock, Desmond Haynes, Neil Williams. Usually there were 5 in the side. And how did that work? I mean, were you, I remember you sort of almost often changing together. And I was privileged actually, because most of the other black players were bowlers, fast bowlers, and I felt like they welcomed me into their group as a sort of honorary black almost, I suppose, because we were all fast bowlers, we all talked the same language, there was a sort of little bowlers group there. But as a group, you were quite tight together, I suppose. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think what was really happening there was, in English cricket at that time, was very unusual. As you know, no other team had 5 black players in a team at any one time. So that, that's pretty unique. And, it was something really to celebrate. I don't think any of us came from affluent background, so to speak. So I guess in many ways we had a lot in common. We were not in our own country. As I said, we came from very hard, deprived backgrounds. We all had to work pretty hard to get where we were. We are now playing in one of the top teams in England. We're having great success. We're playing with a really good bunch of guys. We all grew up together in that team because, people at Embers who were perhaps older than us. Embers was only there the year before me. So the rest of us pretty much all of us came together. So that was a pretty special and unique time.
And you felt comfortable in the team, did you, as a group, as individuals? Did you feel, welcome and part of it all?
Of course. Simon, you saw who I sat next to when I changed. Philip Edmonds, I was right. And a lot of people had issues maybe outside of the dressing room with Philip, but never had a problem at all with someone like Philip Edmonds, who, as you know, it could be difficult, but we never had a problem. No, listen, I enjoyed every single year at Middlesex, and not because we were successful, but I think, we had a really good bunch of guys who were very ambitious and guys who really enjoyed the game and enjoyed the success as well.
You were inspiring to play with because, well, not just for your ability, but I always found that, like in the nets, it was a challenge bowling to somebody like you because you would take it on. You weren't just there to have a few hits and sort of relax. It was quite a feisty sort of environment. And then if we bowled bouncers at you and you played a few hook shots, you'd then give bounces back to us, didn't you? You came running into bowl. You fancied yourself as a quick bowler. And you came running in, and I could always tell when you were going to bowl your bouncer because you ran in a bit harder and bowled a bouncer, and it was quite quick. So you had to be ready for it. But I think the general point is you and actually later Desmond as well, Desmond Haynes, made nets really competitive and actually fun, which quite a time
listen,
other people
for me, for me, I didn't want to go in the nets and have a few throwdowns because in the game, you're playing against Sylvester Clarke, you're not going to get a few throwdowns. It's going to be competitive. So for me, nets had to be competitive. Someone like Rad, as you know, would not bat in the nets. Rad would have somebody throw him a few balls and he'd play a few cover drives and whatever. That was his way. But for me, I wanted Wayne to run in. I wanted Neil Williams to run in because that's what's going to happen in the game. Nobody's going to hold back. So that's how nets meant to me, actually.
Oh, you mentioned Phil Edmonds. I once bowled him a bouncer in the nets and he walked out. He refused to carry on.
Well,
he said, you just don't do that in the nets. And it's funny. Just one other thing, your fielding, talking about the sort of playing time, your fielding was also inspiring. Brilliant catches at second slip, amazing stops at cover. We called you Hoover on the boundary because you ran in at the speed of light, sucked up the ball with one hand and hurled it over the stumps. Where did that come from?
Well, that really came from my upbringing in Barbados, in St. Philip. I said, playing on some pretty rough outfields. I think what really helped was that I loved fielding as a kid. And to be honest, in the early days, perhaps I was more a fielder than a batter because my hero as a kid growing up was Colin Bland. And I'd never seen Colin Bland, but I read extensively about his exploits as a fielder. And that's what resonated with me. So when I was fielding as a kid, I would envisage, and to the point where, my friends of that era knew that. To this day, they still call me by my nickname, which was Bland. But he really was the one that set this whole fielding thing in my head because I kept reading about the amazing things that this guy did. He had an exhibition and he hit the stump 6 times out of 6. 6 pickups, throws, hit the stump every time. That sort of... So I would read extensively about what he did and then try to go onto the field and practice and just imagine what he would do. So coming to England and fielding on those perfect outfields was like Well, Simon, that you could do that in your sleep, because the areas that I was learning to feel, you wouldn't even want to walk on those areas.
You moved into coaching after, a long career and, a very successful career. I think you actually put in your book that overall you won 15 titles with Middlesex, which included county championships and cups and so on. It was an amazing era, wasn't it, actually? The sort of late 70s through to the 90s. But then you went into coaching, apart from other things. I just noticed in your book you mention the lack of black coaches in cricket. And I was thinking about that a bit. You're right, obviously. The only prominent black coach I can think of that has worked in the English game regularly is Otis Gibson. There may be others I've forgotten, but Mark Elaine, I suppose, is another one. What do you put that down to, and how can we rectify that, do you think?
Well, I mean, that's something that I've thought about why there are not many black coaches coaching in the first class game. So I try to say, is it because the guys don't want to coach? Is it because the opportunities are not there? What are the reasons why, they're not getting the opportunity or putting themselves forward for those positions? My investigations has revealed to me that, yes, they have been putting themselves forward for those positions. They're not getting interviews, etc., etc. And you would also find later on in the book I spoke about when I went into football coaching. And in football coaching, I had a desire to be, a high-level coach, and was on the path. But I was also very friendly with the likes of John Barnes and Paul Ince and others like that, who were some of the greats of British football, played for some of the biggest teams in this country. John Barnes is a legend at Liverpool. Played 70-odd times for England. Paul Ince, captain of Man United. And those guys were telling me they don't even get a reply to their letters for applications of jobs. So no interviews, no nothing. And so then I thought later on, well, if they're with their pedigree not getting the chance, what's someone like me who hasn't had that playing pedigree? So that's when I moved away from football back to cricket. And the statistics for football is pretty frightening, really, because 2 years ago I attended a black footballers conference, and the revelation then was that currently in the Premier League there was 44% of players in the Premier League were black, which is a huge amount. But then when you switch to the bench in terms of coaching, management, that was down, that stays to 4%. Are there parallels in cricket and football? And if there is parallels, what is that deciding factor? I don't know what that deciding factor is, but what I do know is that those percentages in both sports are too low for the number of players that actually play in the game. Obviously, they are not the same number of black players playing in the county championship. Certainly not as many as back in our time. So since we've all grown up here in England and watched football, we've been seeing black players all the time, and lots of them. So what is the reason why there's no transition from the playing field to the dugout, and vice versa with cricket? So, yeah, I mean, those are questions that somebody need to answer, and let us understand why it's happening.
And the other burning question, just to finish really, is West Indies cricket. You spent a fair bit of time, obviously, Director of Sport at the University of West Indies in Barbados, coaching cricket, coaching football, etc. Where are we at now with West Indies cricket? How can we encourage them to be sort of more prominent again, do you think?
Simon, boy, that's a long, long story. I mean, West Indies cricket now is very much at the bottom of... I mean, they're really struggling. There's no question about that. And they're struggling in many ways. I think over the years, the drain of those top players into T20 leagues and not being available for the West Indies have really hurt the region.
But is there still talent coming through, or are they
There's talent
distracted by
coming.
other sports?
There's talent coming. There's talent coming through, but there's nowhere for the talent to go. Back in our time, talent like Wayne Daniel, Larry Gomes, etc. England was their way out, where they came and they played as young players, developed,
Malcolm Marshall,
and
obviously.
became players. No Marshall, etc. But now there's no. I mean, Richards, gone, all those guys developed their games in England.
Yeah.
The opportunities now for young West Indians are literally zero because counties want, if they get an overseas player, he's got to be a top-notch overseas international. West Indies are struggling, so maybe one or two West Indians may get the opportunity. So this year you've got David Seals, Sussex, Anderson Phillips. Can't think of another fellow. Last year, Shea Hope played a couple of games, etc. But West Indies cricket is so poor right now internationally that nobody's going to look at even their top players to fulfill a county contract. But the real problem is the younger players under that. There's no way for them to go outside of the Caribbean. And if they play even a full season in the Caribbean at first-class level, right, you've played a maximum of 10 games and not a high-quality 10 matches. So then that group comes together to take on Australia in a test series, which they've got to do next month in the West Indies. That doesn't end well.
Well, they did. I mean, of course, they did beat Australia in Brisbane, didn't they? Famously a year or so ago.
But that's a one-off.
That was a one-off. Sure.
That can happen.
Yeah. So it's quite sad, and I guess what you need is resources, i.e., money, really. But what's the standard of? I mean, you were brought up well, certainly when you were very young. Certainly the players like Marshall and Haynes and all those were brought up playing your club cricket in Barbados. Is that still strong?
Extremely weak. Very poor standards. Everybody's in T20 mode.
Yeah.
That's the and 20 modes. T20 is not about batting long; it's about batting quick. So even in the club matches, you start at 12 o'clock. By 5 o'clock, one team has been bowled out, the other team has lost 5 wickets. That's the sort of cricket that you have now. So really, the club cricket cannot be the catalyst for into the international cricket. I think where West Indies could get some help is and it won't just be down to the ECB, because I know this problem is a government issue with the managed migration policy that England has embarked on over the last 8 years, means that local clubs, even like your club, Ealing, cannot bring a young West Indian over to play, even as an amateur. That's the real problem, because every summer there were hundreds of youngsters playing cricket up and down this country, honing their skills. Because of the managed migration policy that exists now in the UK, that doesn't allow them. But I'm not saying that it is purely for West Indians, because it is stopping Australians, South Africans, Indians, everybody from doing the same thing. So all cricket is being challenged because of that. India can sustain it because their cricket is strong in India. They've got the resources. They can say, well, to hell with you, we can do this. Australia can do it as well. Place like West Indies, West Indies has to be an exporter of talent, because their cricket is, we've got very few teams to maintain any talent that come through. But if they cannot enhance that talent, then they're of no value to anyone else. So if the ECB could lobby the government to perhaps relax that managed migration policy, that's what we need, really. We need that. We need that more than money.
Opportunity. Yeah.
We need the opportunity more than money.